So in all of this mess at the Capitol, had an interim study back in the fall. How many know a little bit about the interim study that we did at the Capitol back in September? Some of you do. So I'm going to go through a little bit of how I kind of kick-started that, which I did. It was combined or joint with the energy chair, and a lot of those speakers were pro-wind and solar. It was primarily on wind. A lot of my speakers were obviously on the other side of the fence. So I'm going to go through a little bit of kind of what I leaned into to start that off and kind of lay the groundwork for what are some of the arguments that we continue to hear, right? I mean, there's arguments on both sides of the fence, and we know that, and we've been talking through that for over a year or two or more for some people. And so I want to address some of that. I want to go over, does this industry actually benefit the state of Oklahoma financially, right? So let's look at it from that perspective. And then Tom did a great job of looking at kind of some of those projects in other parts of the state. I'm then going to talk about a few pieces of legislation at the Capitol right now, and then I want to open it up for Q&A and make this more interactive, and we can kind of talk together as a group. So a lot of what I heard at a Senate interim study prior to ours in the House side back in the fall was this whole argument from somebody. He was a professor out of Kansas that was making arguments that, well, the Founding Fathers, James Madison, the Federalist Papers, it all talks about property rights, and you can do whatever you want, whenever you want, however you want, with your property. And so what I did was a little bit of research on the Federalist Papers. So let's take a step back just real quick and look at what James Madison, one of our founding fathers, said in the Federalist Papers with respect to this topic. So Federalist Paper number 10 talks about factions and the public good. He emphasizes, being James Madison, emphasized the risk of factions pursuing narrow interests at the expense of the broader community. However, Madison also argued that representative government can refine public views into rules serving the public interest. Setback regulations that protect established investment-backed expectations of residents could be justified as a balance. Now, if we go on to another Federalist Paper, number 51, it talks about checks and balances. Madison stresses the importance of structural protections to prevent overreach. Here, local governments having a voice would serve as a check against state or industry interests pushing for wind energy development without sufficient regard to local conditions. Okay, so this supports giving local communities, which is what we keep talking about, a meaningful voice, as it reflects the principle that power should be divided and counterbalanced to prevent domination. How many people think that our state government dominates power today? Or big corporate interests dominate in the power world today? Last with the Federalist Papers, numbers 45 and 46 talk about local authority and state interests. So in short, these essays really stress that states, and by extension local governments, retain authority over matters closest to the people. Regulation of land use is traditionally a local concern. So the Federalist Papers support the idea that localities are better suited than distant legislatures to judge the rural character of their communities and to protect residents' expectations. Okay, so that's really a summary and kind of a takeaway from James Madison, the Federalist Papers, and really is relevant to what we're dealing with today. At that interim study, I also had former Attorney General John O'Connor come and speak. So from his obvious experience as the lead attorney and legal professional for the entire state of Oklahoma, he put together a whole presentation, but it really boils down to, he provided a ton of citations and precedents in state law, in case law, affirming that county level decisions, county commissioners have the ability to make these decisions, contrary to what a lot of the ADAs and DAs have been saying all around the state, and that along with that, people in the counties have referendum capabilities to be able to initiate citizen petitions. Okay, that is in law, but again, it continues to get roadblock after roadblock when I see other counties with people trying to do a petition and it gets thwarted or what have you. He affirmed it over and over in his presentation that we do have that capability. So that's kind of on the property rights side, the local control piece a little bit. I also hear a lot of a big argument of, well, this is going to help the local schools and it's going to bring in a ton of money and it's this big windfall that everybody's going to benefit from, right? Let's take a look at the actual data on the financial side. So if you look at, so over the last 10 years, we have spiked in the amount of wind turbines, wind projects that have been developed. We've increased our overall wind power by 900% over the last 10 to 15 years. If you look at it even before that spike, okay, there was still a lot of wind that was developed prior to that, but if you look at every single project installed through the year 2016, so 10 years ago, every project that was installed through 2016, the industry will tell you on average, these things last about 25 years. That's what they're telling you. It's oftentimes a lot less than that, but let's just give them the benefit of 25 years for the sake of argument. Over the projected lifetime of every single one of those wind projects that was installed through 2016, they would generate, the estimate generation was $1.12 billion in ad valorem in total, okay? Every single one of those installed projects over the entire project life is going to generate less tax than oil and gas does on average in a single year. 25 years worth of tax revenue, they can't even compete in 1 year worth of oil and gas revenue. However, we still today have about 50% natural gas and 41% wind in our electricity generation. It continues to jump up, and it's, in my opinion, negligent from a state perspective to continue to have wind be that high of a percentage in our portfolio from an energy production. At the end of that 25-year life, the Oklahoma Tax Commission will have reimbursed almost 33% of that ad valorem back to the wind companies. They're getting at least 30 to 35% on average of that money back. So when they tell you, we're going to give your town and your city so many millions of dollars, you need to cut that by a third at least, because they're telling you that at full capacity, full production, full lifespan. That's what they're projecting it, and it's not at all the case most times. So wind energy continues to displace natural gas production. Who in here works in the oil field or has worked in the oil field? We still got the same number of rigs running right now? No, we don't. Natural gas in 2023, 10.3% of our total Oklahoma natural gas production was offset and eliminated due to the increased wind energy production. That was almost a $60 million loss in gross production tax revenue to the state of Oklahoma. So the citizenry across the entire state lost $60 million worth of tax revenue from oil and gas because we continue to push this insanity, in my opinion, on wind production. Since we implemented the zero emission tax credit in the state of Oklahoma, we've lost $548 million in gross production tax revenue from oil and gas because they're continuing to go somewhere else and they're drilling somewhere else because we're taxing them to death. By the way, one of the biggest increases in state history, if not the most egregious increase in state history, was in 2018 when our taxes went through the roof. The vast majority of that was on the oil and gas field. The gross production tax took a major hit. What's the analogy? If you want less of something, what do? Tax it more. We're finding that out right now, what's happening with oil and gas. So that loss in GPT, it really confirms that the Southwest Power Pool is the regional grid that our electric grid is on. Okay, so we're one of like 14 states across the country that's on the Southwest Power Pool electric grid. They will openly tell you that they take the cheapest energy all day long, and that's what because they want to give the cheapest cost to their ratepayers. That makes sense. But wind energy continues to be the quote-unquote cheapest option because they're completely subsidized from the feds and still getting subsidies at the state level as well. Which again is continuing to shove natural gas out of the equation, which continues to lower the production here in the state and the surrounding states. 2024, a couple of years ago, 62% of every power generation that was seeking a connection to the Southwest Power Pool grid was renewable, 31% was battery storage, and barely 7% was natural gas related. That's not a good trend. So when I was putting all this together for the interim study, I had our research team reach out to all of the, I can't remember how many counties in total. Tom could probably spout it off the top of his head. 32 counties that have wind turbines in them. It was kind of a rush request. We only got about 13 or 14 counties that actually responded, so about 40%. But they affirmed the statistic that I told you a minute ago. The exemptions across those 13 counties in ad valorem exemptions for the wind energy industry was about $689 million over the last 10 years, maybe. Didn't even include all of the zero emission tax credits that they got. So on average, they're pushing back at least 30% of the dollars to those wind companies through the ad valorem exemptions. So couple more things real quick. Oil and gas, comparatively speaking, in 2023, despite the $60 million loss in GPT, they still generated $60 billion in total statewide economic impact. Oil and gas is 23% of the total statewide economic activity, $54 billion in household earnings, 1 out of every $5 in statewide household income, 10% of the state's workforce, and $3.2 billion in total taxes in 2023, despite being shoved out. Imagine what that would look like. Something I want to elaborate on, Tom already talked about some of those projects in Sealing and Goodwell. If you look at Dewey County as a whole, they've got 4 major wind projects out there. And there was data showing, and I got some of this information from somebody else that helped put some of this together. There's data showing that Dewey County's population, so they keep talking about, again, this is going to be really good for the community, really good for the schools. It's going to bolster, everything in your community. Well, in Dewey County, with 4 major wind projects, their population began to decline after 2010, following an increase from 2000 to 2010. So for a 10-year period, their population was steadily increasing. Then in 2012, in 2018, those major wind projects came online, and it followed with a period of accelerated population decline. I'm not saying there's a direct correlation, but why do we have 4 major wind projects in the county, and all of a sudden you got people leaving the county, right? After there was a lot of people that had been moving into the county. It doesn't make sense to me. So, real quick, some of the legislative items at the Capitol, kind of where we're at. So I had a bill that we worked on a bill last year, and it was hotly contested, and we debated on it forever, and we got to some language on the House side that, in my opinion, and I told them, was at the minimum standard that I would support. I told them there's a floor that I'm not going to the basement. There's a floor that I will stay on, but if you guys go any lower, you do not have my support. And to their defense, they stayed at that minimum barrier after we argued on trying to make it a little bit better. We passed that language twice in the House. They killed it the first time, and they sat on it at the end of session. That bill, which is Senate Bill 2, which originated in the Senate, but we stripped the language out and put our language in and sent it back over and said this is actually way better, and this is what they're sitting on, would be 1.5 times the tip height, half a mile from a home. But the key ingredient for me to stay, because I don't believe that's enough. That's not anywhere close to being enough, in my opinion. The key ingredient for me was that counties would have the option to adjust those distances, up, down, or even eliminate. Okay, so it's fair across the board. If people don't want it, go for it. You guys vote on it as a county, but it puts the decision closest, again, like we talked about in the beginning, puts the decision closest to where the people are going to be impacted. That bill right now has just been taken over by the head of the Senate Pro Tem, Lonnie Paxton. I'm anticipating the Speaker of the House, Kyle Hilbert, will take it over on our side. That bill will probably go to conference committee, which basically means it's going to get watered down further, and then they're going to try to pass it sometime this session. If it gets watered down at all, I'm out. Like it's already too far at the lowest standard, especially if the county option, which was the #1 thing that the Senate argued against. They didn't like the county option. That's the first thing. As soon as we sent it back over, they're like, we don't like the county option. Real. So we're keeping our eyes on that, because the bill that I drafted this year tried to simplify it down to where there weren't so many moving parts like we have in SB2. Senate Bill 2 has a lot of moving parts. It's a pretty complex language. I tried to simplify it down this year to basically say, give counties the option to give a green light or red light on the front end of every project. Every industrial wind, every industrial solar project, up or down, and then let the citizens come back and say, we disagree with that and we want to vote a different way. That's it. That's all I pushed for. The energy chair on the House side said, I'm not going to hear it, and I'm not hearing any other wind or solar bill because we are looking at Senate Bill 2 as the main vehicle alive at the moment. So everything else was dead on arrival at the beginning of session. There is another bill that somebody brought up to me on the way in today, Senate Bill, what is it, 1514, if somebody wants to, 1514, thank you, by Senator Julie McIntosh. I think some key components to that bill would have some upfront bonding and surety requirements that these companies would be on the hook for decommissioning, because we know that that's a major issue when they come to end of life or they abandon a project, they go out of business, bankruptcy or what have you. They may pay some small surety bond today, but when that entity goes bankrupt, they just wipe their hands and they run off and they don't do anything with it. So this would actually put some more teeth into them having some legitimate decommissioning requirements on the books, which would be great. So that was supposed to be heard in the Senate Energy Committee today. I was just informed that the Senate Energy Committee did not meet. They canceled their meeting today. I think there's only one or two more weeks that they can hear bills on the Senate side. Probably a couple more because we're getting ready to get into oversight committee work on our side. But really, you know, from my opinion, I think most of you that are here tonight really know where I stand on the issue of industrial wind, even solar. But now, and a big topic this week, when I presented a bill earlier this week, was data centers. Data centers are the next thing. Battery storage is the next thing. So if you haven't seen a wind project or a solar project, you're probably going to start seeing data centers being proposed. There was a rumor a couple of days ago that Wellston is a target for a data center. There was also a rumor that was confirmed by somebody in my office yesterday that there is a data center going around south of Stroud or around Stroud, meeting with local officials, fire departments, talking to them. So that's obviously already got some legs on it. I do not want our county to be completely bulldozed over by the industrial machine that is out there and targeting us right now. That's my main issue. And it boils down to, from a rights perspective, these machines impact far beyond the four corners of the property that they're installed on. My right to swing my fist stops where your nose begins, right? I can't just go around swinging and hitting people. That don't work. The same thing on my property. I can't do something that absolutely negatively impacts my neighbor and not be held responsible for it or liable for it. That's what we're talking about. This is not a small ice cream shop on Main Street. It's a massive industrial complex. That's why I'm standing up so hard against this. So.